We're gonna make a particularly delicious soup. It's vegetable based. It's got just a little bit of smoked turkey in it that's gonna give it a lot of flavor for a really small amount of animal protein, which I love. I've got a big soup pot back there that's got a couple tablespoons of olive oil in it that's heating up. And then we've got kind of the holy trinity of French and American cooking here. We've got our onions and carrots and celery that are roughly chopped. We've got a couple cloves of garlic that have been grated. And I'm also going to add about 2 tablespoons of tomato paste. This is really going to bump up the flavor, the umami content. So it's going to give a really nice, rich mouthfeel, especially because I'm going to cook the tomato paste with the vegetables, so they'll all kind of brown and sear together, give it a really nice depth of flavor. So I'm going to bring these over, get those in the pan. I'm going to saute them for about 4 to 5 minutes until they just start to take on a little bit of color. I'm going to add a quart of chicken stock. You can use vegetable stock if you like. You can really use anything. You can use water if you want to. You'll probably have to up the salt content that you add a little bit if you just use water. And you can use store-bought stock, you can use bouillon, or you can make stock yourself. So we'll get that going, and then we'll come back and put the rest of the ingredients in as soon as these got sauteed. So our vegetables for our soup have been sauteing for 5 or 6 minutes. They've all gotten really nice and brown and caramelized. They're starting to get pretty translucent, so it's time to add most of the rest of the other ingredients. We're gonna add a quart of chicken stock. As I mentioned, we're also gonna add 1 full can, 15-ounce can of cooked beans. We're using garbanzo beans. Really, you can use just about anything. You can use navy beans, pinto beans, kidney beans. And I like to actually add the bean liquid directly to the soup pot because it's got a lot of nice flavor. It's got a lot of nice viscosity. So I might as well add it because we're making soup anyway. We'll go ahead and add that. We'll add our full quart of chicken stock. That should come up to a simmer pretty quickly. And then we'll add a good pinch each of salt and pepper. Salt is essential, probably the most essential of all seasonings. It's also has a lot of chemical properties that change the way that food cooks. It draws water out of them. And the longer that salt sits on your food, the more of an opportunity it has to actually get into the middle of it so that you're actually getting fully seasoned food all the way through when you take a bite rather than just getting some salt on the outside. It really improves the flavor and the texture of the food. So we're going to start seasoning it now. We're going to bring that up to a simmer. We're going to simmer it for about 20 minutes or so. And then at that point, we're going to add our kale, because if we were to add the kale right now, it would get really brownish and kind of army green, and it really destroys some of those nice fresh flavors. So we're not going to cook it for the entirety of the time that the soup cooks. So we'll give this a good 20-minute head start. And we'll add the rest of our ingredients and we'll finish it off. So we've got the final additions to our soup. It's been simmering away behind me for about 20 minutes, so the vegetables are nice and soft. We have a couple thick slices of smoked turkey breast that I've diced into about a 1/2-inch dice. We've got a full bunch of that lovely lacinato kale, also called black kale, dinosaur kale. You can really use any type of kale that you have or that appeals to you. And a little tip, regardless of what the recipe says, if it says something like 2 cups, 3 cups of shredded greens, you can really add as much as you want. So there's no need to put back, 2 or 3 leaves of kale into the fridge. Once you put this into the soup, it's going to melt down, not literally melt down, but it's really going to collapse into itself such that whether you add 2 cups, 3 cups, 4 cups, it's essentially going to look the same. So it's a great way to pack some extra nutrients into your soup, because dark leafy greens are one of, if not the most nutrient dense food that you eat on a daily basis. So the more of those you can sneak into some soup, the better. And it also saves you from having a couple just loose leaves of kale in your fridge. So use it all up. We've got a couple fresh herbs here. I've got a handful each of fresh basil and thyme leaves. So because this is just going into soup and I'm not using it as a garnish, I'm really just gonna roughly chop that. Another tip is when you have what I like to call woodier herbs, so like your thyme or your sage where the stems are pretty dense. Rosemary is another good example. Once you take the leaves off and you use those, you end up with these sort of woody stems of the herbs. And normally you'd probably throw those away. If you don't make your own stock, you should, because you can save all your vegetable trim and your meat trim in like a gallon-sized Ziploc bag in the freezer. And once that's full, just put it in a pot, cover it with water, bring it up to a simmer, about 40 minutes for vegetable stock, about 2 hours for a bone stock, and you have free food essentially from scraps that you were going to throw away. This is an absolutely key ingredient if you're going to do that. So go ahead and throw your herb stems in with your vegetable trim, because the stems have all of the same flavor compounds as the leaves that we eat. They're just kind of locked up in these really tough stems that I don't want to chew. But if you throw them into simmering liquid for an hour or two, you're going to get all of those flavors of that herb without any of the leaves. So save those. So we're going to take those herbs, we're going to take that kale, we're going to take the turkey, we're going to stir it into the soup, we're going to bring it up to a simmer, and we really only need to simmer it for 5 to 10 minutes at the most, really just to bring everything up to temperature, let the greens collapse, and then we'll be done. So our soup's done. We gave that another 5 to 10 minutes on the stove. As you can see, that huge volume of greens collapsed down so that you can absolutely see greens in there, but it's nothing like the volume that it was. But all of those nutrients are in there. So that's finished. Give it a little taste, see if it needs any adjustment. If it needs a little bit of acidity, you could add just a touch of vinegar of some kind. May need a pinch of salt. But that's essentially it. You do want to be careful with salt in soup, especially if you're using prepared chicken broth, chicken stock, and if you're using ingredients that are inherently salty, like the smoked turkey that we added has a fair amount of salt in it. So I like to, for both of those reasons, for this soup and soups like it, I like to under season it a little bit. So a little bit less salt than I would add to another soup. Taste it and see how those salty ingredients have really affected it. And then if you need to add a pinch of salt at the end to bring it up, you can do that. Like any soup or brothy, liquidy dish, this is going to be delicious right now. It's going to be much better tomorrow. Those flavors are going to sit and meld and get to know each other. As that cools and reheats, it's going to thicken a little bit, and it will be much more homogeneous and developed in flavor tomorrow. And this will also keep in the fridge for a week if you cool it down properly. So great thing to make ahead, especially coming into colder weather. This is a great lunch, easy, quick supper to have on hand. You can just add some bread or croutons to that, whole grain. You've got a complete meal right there.